This is a 14-inch vase. We don't know who did it. And when you look at it, you remember I've told you that when you see something that, in fact, on our study in video 3 on the assets and liabilities of acid polish, I told you one of the main reasons, one of the 3 assets of acid polish is you can get in all the tiny nooks and crannies and the crevices, and you can do these intricate pieces. Well, I had assumed this was acid polished until I got to looking at it today, and this rascal is wood polished, and I am I'm impressed, I'm overwhelmed, but I want to tell you a little about what was involved in just putting this piece together. Now, first of all, the foreman took the piece, the basic blank, before he handed it to the first cutter that has a significant, he has one of the larger wheels, either carborundum or steel with water and sand dripping on it, and the foreman, with red lead paint, drew this circle, and because this is a cluster of 7 hobstars with deep miters in between, he drew all of these lines with red lead paint. Then he didn't stop right there. This circle is a figure 8, and it goes back up the other side and crosses back there, and on the back side is the same cluster of 7 hobstars, and this right here, this cross, is the back side of this figure 8. Then he also put the red lead paint on the bottom of it right here so that the man with the big wheel could cut that. Now that's all well and good, except when he hands it to him, the first cutter doesn't have as much of a problem as we will see the third cutter has. So as he is cutting the major miters, and if you can follow me here with this picture, he is cutting, and the wheel is down here, remember, and he's looking through a piece of glass that doesn't have anything on it. It's wide open. This is a big window, and he's looking through there, and he is guiding this wheel, and if he's right-handed, in his left hand he has this big glob of wet clay, and that's absorbing the shock. And then he has his right hand, or his other hand, whichever it is near the cutting wheel, and he has to keep moving it so that he can feel for the heat. And then if you'll remember in video 3, we talked about 4, we talked about the sound that the wheel makes, and how at the Hawks factory, if you had a cold that affected your hearing, they sent you home because the sound of the wheel on the glass told you if you were going too deep. So let's say he had this circle to do, so it's on the back side, it's against the wheel, and he's having to move it and move this piece of clay and keep these fingers right there as he turns it and keeps it going. You see what contortions he has to go through, and he's only the first cutter. Okay, after he finishes those big cuts, he hands it to the next guy who has a wheel that's a little bit smaller. Now, if the first person didn't follow the red lead lines perfectly, then this space might be too big or too small. The space in between these might be too big or too small. And in there they have to squeeze hobstar, 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 hobstar. And each one has to be a little bit smaller. And then in here they have to squeeze 7 hobstars, and then there is cross-hatching in between. And then the other motif that's added is nail head diamond in several strategic areas. So the guy with the second biggest wheel takes the piece, and he doesn't have the benefit of the red lead paint, more than likely, and he does the big lines on the hobstar, but he doesn't do these smaller spots in the middle of the hobstar because that's a different size wheel. So he will do these hobstars that require that size of wheel, and then he will also probably do the nail head diamond. Then it goes to the third person, but bear in mind, after these hobstars are on, it's beginning to get cluttered, And the wheel is on the far side, and all the time the cutter has to look at the other side of the piece. So by the time the third guy comes along and he puts the little tiny hob stars in there, and then he decorates the center with the same size miters on the big hob stars, it's really beginning to get cluttered. As a matter of fact, by the time the third guy looks at it, there isn't anywhere to look through except the cross-hatching areas. And those are strategically placed throughout. And those are what they call a window. And every piece has to have a window because the man just has to be able to see where that wheel is on the back side. Now, being that this is a wood polished piece, the cross-hatching wasn't done right away. It was passed down to a guy who had wooden wheels, and the wooden wheels had rotten stone and pumice on them, and the wheels were made out of willow and cherry wood, and he started polishing the big cuts. Same way the first guy did. The first guy was a rougher, and he cut them, and this guy comes along and polishes them. And then it goes to another guy who has a smaller wheel, and he starts polishing the hob stars. And then it goes to some people that have hard felt brushes, and these are hard felt wheels, and these wheels are made out of felt that comes from Brazil, and it's very, very hard. And it's cut to those same miters, and they go back over these same miters. And this piece, there's probably 3,500 cuts on this piece, and it was gone over, each cut was gone over once at least to cut it, and probably 3 or 4 times to polish it. So the last thing they did, after they get it fully polished, then they go back and with a wheel they call a gang wheel, which is it's a flat wheel with little indentations on it. They can do this, and let's try to bring in a real close on some of the cross hatching, like right here for instance. They can do this in probably 2 swipes, and they go zip this way and turn it and go zip that way and close those windows. Now this is unpolished at that point, so they take their brushes, they're called Tampico brushes, and very fine brushes, and they go over this cross hatching and they polish that as best they can with those brushes, because there's no way in the world any kind of felt wheel could get in and follow all those little cracks. So that tells you a little bit about windows. It tells you a little bit about how they did this kind of stuff, and